All right. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today's session, which is a part of Break Free series. So this is a series of talks and webinars with the Change in Leaders in QA series. So thank you so much again. So my name is Shoaib Ahmed, and I'm a technical lead pre-sales consultant at Peak. So in today's session, we will discuss about the adoption of the cloud testing in a digital transformation journey. So a quick intro. So where we talk about the how the testing involves when we break free, right? So testing in software or development has been through several changes over the decades and seen improvements in its efficiency and effectiveness. So this was possible because of a few minds chose to break free and solve various testing challenges to make it better. So now they are here to lead the way. So we have taken the liberty to identify and host the change leaders who are transforming the testing space for better. So the Break Free series birthed out of conversations around having these change leaders who are ready to share their knowledge and insights to make an impact in the testing space. So with us, we have George, who is a seasoned automation expert with over 2 decades of experience in the test automation space. So currently he heads the team at Testhouse Ltd as the Vice President Solutions. He is also an avid test automation evangelist who shares his insights through his podcast channel on automation Hangout. He has worked in organizations like UST, Mall Labs in the past, and he is running a podcast automation hangout.com where he basically interviews leaders on topics of automation, DevOps, and RPA. As per the listen notes, this podcast is one of the top 10% most popular shows out of 2 lakh, 2 crore 83 lakh 59 and 59 podcasts globally. So with that, I'll just quickly like to pass this to George for his quick introduction from his side, and then we'll get started with the session. Over to you, George.
Yep. Thank you, Shohei, for the quick introduction. I think you'll have to pass on the rights to me so that I can actually share my camera as well. I think you'll have to make me the host. Shoaib. Yep.
Right, George.
Thank you, Shoaib, for the quick intro. So I'll give a very short introduction from my side. I'm George Ukkuru. I've been in the software testing industry for the last 22 years, mostly working with retail, health insurance, and now the banking domain. And test automation is one of my core strengths within the software testing stream. And as you know, we have seen a lot of changes happening in this industry in the last 2 to 3 years, I would say, which is mostly around maybe starting from March of 2020. That is when we actually started seeing changes in the way testing is actually performed. Not only testing, the entire IT landscape has actually gone through a lot of changes in the last, I would say, like 24 to 30 months. And this was primarily because of the lockdown that happened. And what I would say is, like, prior to that, I would say there was focus on digital large enterprises, especially Fortune 500 or the Global 2000 companies were mostly focused around building applications that are actually having a digital channel. So if it as a retailer, it would have been actually good in order to actually have an e-commerce website. At the same time, they also had a store, and that is only possible for large retailers, especially. That's the reason I was telling, like, large retailers or large scale businesses actually had a digital channel, whereas many of these small scale as well as medium scale businesses never even thought about having a digital front end or a solution to sell either the product or a service. But things changed all of a sudden when the physical ways of selling goods and services or products was not possible. So that at that point of time, even though a lot of service providers, like for example, the giants like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, was trying to actually push their cloud solution, there was resistance in a lot of organizations in moving to the cloud. because they felt that it was not secure. But all of a sudden, that people started adopting cloud as well as digital solutions to actually sell their products and services. So that is one of the important changes that is actually found. And the other change was basically everyone was dependent on custom development in the sense like custom development in the sense most of the apps that were getting built were based on what do you call by using a programming language or basically it can be Java or any kind of language, and it was mostly like coded kind of development that used to happen. Whereas since there was limited time to actually push your applications into your customers, a lot of people started learning low code, no code platforms, and organizations also are opening using these technologies to build apps. So two changes. One is cloud became more, people started adopting the cloud. Second thing is there was a need to actually go digital because of the market situation. And since the resources were not available, because everyone is trying to go digital, the resources were very scarce, was very rare to get. And you also had there is scarcity in the resource pool, and then you also had very limited time to push these applications. That actually caused a increased adoption of low code no code platforms. So that is what happened maybe in the last first couple of months during 2020. So how did it impact testing? So the way you test a digital application is very different from how you would actually imagine testing a legacy kind of an app that you might have had. So the basic difference is the focus around the digital application is not just a functionality where you basically test the requirements or user stories that is given to you. You also have an equal amount of focus around non-functional testing aspects. So that's a primary difference that you may actually find. So let me give you some examples of non-functional testing that you may have to actually look out for when you're actually dealing with a digital app. So primarily, every application that is actually being released, if it's a native app, mobile app, you have to definitely test it across multiple mobile devices. And if it's an M.M website or a mobile website, you definitely have to test it across multiple device types or browser types. It can be a desktop-based browser or a browser running on a tablet, Android, or on iOS. So the amount of effort that is spent on compatibility testing by looking at it mostly like you basically do compatibility testing to make sure that your functionality is actually working across these browsers and mobile devices. And you're also worried about the look and feel as well as the experience. So you're basically doing a visual validation as well as a user experience validation across these different channels or different devices that you might be having. So that actually takes a lot of your time. And there are a lot of solutions that you're actually going to cover today that likely help you to do this kind of validation. The second important aspect that you may need to look at is basically maybe optimizing your website for search engines. So people have to come to your website if you want to actually improve your revenue or if you want to provide more services to your users. So search engine optimization is a very key stream. Even though it was there, now it became even more competitive because a lot of customers, a lot of organizations trying to sell the same kind of service. So SEO testing also picked up. Because you definitely have to keep your website optimized so that it actually turns up in search engines or when people are searching for information, it actually turns up. That became a major stream. Security, there was always a focus on security, but the number of incidents around security is also increasing. I think in 2021 alone, we had close to 15% of 15% increase in the in the amount of security incidents that happened. So organizations started looking at ways of actually preventing these kind of security attacks. At the same time, there's also the DevSecOps culture was also picking up in many organizations. So having an independent team around application security was not a practical kind of a scenario. So the DevSecOps culture was actually improved. Or people started looking at adopting the DevSecOps culture within the development organizations in the last 24 months, due to which you actually have practices around code scanning, architecture reviews, dynamics testing, or dynamic scans, and all of those things embedded into Agile as well as into the DevOps teams. And then you also had accessibility as another key area of focus, because if you look at the global population, close to 1 billion of the global population is actually having some kind of or differently able. And if you're not actually supporting your websites or your digital products, if you're not catering them to their needs, you're actually losing on a big market share. So there is a focus on improving accessibility of applications. Since all these applications are external facing, it's important to actually address the needs of the differently able people also. You might have also seen the amount of workload that was actually available on the website that existed started increasing, because digital was the only channel that people were relying on. So websites that were actually built for maybe for 1 million users now had to cater to maybe a 2 million. So there was increased focus around performance testing, where customers were actually interested in supporting their websites for increased workload. At the same time, there is also a heavy focus on client-side performance. So the server-side performance as well as client-side performance had had an increasing trend, because everyone wanted to actually test for these parameters. And especially when you're dealing with a website or an app, everyone wants the screen to be loaded in maybe 2 to 3 second time frame. So that also had a major shift. And then you also had new types of apps being started rolling out. Or there was an increase in the number of apps, especially around maybe like things like virtual assistants. So you had shortage of physical assistants to help people out. So the first way of connecting with your customer was actually using virtual assistants. And a lot of digital processes also were actually getting automated. So you also had an increasing trend around RPA bot implementation. And all of these bot implementations were not successful initially. And then customers started realizing the pain points that users are undergoing when they're interacting with virtual assistants as well as bots. And then there was a focus around testing those apps as well, which came up in the later stages, maybe towards 2020 and 21. And the final area that I would like to touch upon is basically cloud. So, as I was mentioning earlier, cloud was not something that everyone wanted to implement. There were apprehensions about security as well as the viability. But since the infrastructure setup was now what you say not possible in the sense like it became difficult for people to actually look at what you say doing on-prem kind of applications. So there is a move towards moving for cloud-based applications. So there is a lot of lift and shift of applications that are actually happening in the last 2 years. And applications, some of the applications that were built earlier did not actually support what do you say large workload. So the organization started refactoring or modernizing some of their existing apps. Whereas any new business that is actually starting, maybe if you're a startup, everyone actually started adopting the digital first. So initially, digital first was not something that was actually considered to be a priority, but now every organization is actually going ahead with a digital first kind of objective. So that's what has happened, and how testing has actually moved from what do you say traditional ways of testing to more focus around non-functional due to the influence of digital. Now cloud as I impacted, as I was mentioning, like there is a lot of work that's happening around cloud modernization, refactoring, as well as lift and shift. At the same time, there are multiple use cases that can be actually looked at when it comes to cloud. So for example, it's not just application developers who can actually use the cloud. Even test engineers also have room for using some of these cloud-based capabilities. So I'll actually cover some of these basic capabilities before we actually move on to the Q&A session. So one is basically around devices as well as what you call browser-based testing. So as I was mentioning earlier, the amount of browser-based testing or compatibility testing that you have to do has actually increased. There are a number of browsers, and I would say like at least 2,000 to 3,000 new mobile devices coming into the market every year. So you may not be able to actually do use all of these devices or buy all of these physical devices and then do testing in the first place. Second place, you have multiple versions of browsers. You have maybe like 5 or 6 popular browsers and then multiple versions of those browsers. You have to test maybe like at least 3 versions. So like it's a big permutation combinations of things that you need to test. And then setting up a local lab or an infrastructure for testing, this is actually very painful. One, you have to spend money on building it. You have to spend time to actually build a lab. And at the same time, you actually have updates coming every now and then. For example, if you're managing a browser-based test lab, you have operating system updates coming in. So you have to actually update your base infrastructure. You have your browser versions coming in every day. So you have to actually keep your infrastructure up to date and running every now and then. So that amount of time that you spend as well as cost that you spend on setting up a lab for cross-browser or cross-device testing is pretty high. And that's a perfect use case of cloud. So you can either set up a device cloud on-prem, or you can actually go with a cross-browser testing or a cross-device testing platform like pCloudy, where you can actually move all of your testing around your digital applications around compatibility to the cloud. The same applies to performance testing as well. So previously, if some of you have worked on performance testing, you might be testing on maybe a scaled down environment when it comes to performance testing. You may not have all your required infrastructure or the size of the infrastructure will be very different if you're dealing with performance testing assignment. But now, since the infrastructure is available in the cloud and you need to use it only for a selected period of time, your performance testing infrastructure is also equally good as your production infrastructure. So performance testing is a good area that you can actually move on to the cloud. You can actually move your application infrastructure for performance testing, or your entire test environment can be hosted in the cloud, both from functional as well as non-functional testing. And you should be able to use some of these capabilities of the cloud to actually scale up and scale down your hardware requirements to do anything like a performance test. So maybe you can actually spin up 10 machines to inject a load of maybe a lakh of users or 500,000 kind of users. That is one important thing. So basically, cross-browser testing and cross-device testing is a good example. Performance testing is a very good use case on where you can actually move your application as well as, or remove your load injection, or your performance testing workload generation can happen in the cloud. Your test environments can definitely move on to the cloud for both functional as well as non-functional testing. And finally, you can also think about moving your your testing tools to the cloud. So if you look at all the modern tools that you might have, for example, a tool like Jira, or most of these tools actually have cloud-based subscriptions. So you don't have to spend time in installing the tool because everything is browser-based. So tomorrow, if you want to actually, maybe there are 10 more testers getting added to your team, you can actually go and subscribe for 10 more additional licenses of your product. So previously, that was not the case. If I have a 50-member test organization, I may actually go ahead and buy maybe 60 licenses, or maybe assume that I'm buying 50 licenses, maybe only 40% of that is used. The remaining licenses are unused because my team doesn't have enough work. But now that's very different. You're actually dependent on cloud-based tools. You have subscription-based models where you can actually go and subscribe to a license for a month. When you actually have work, you go and buy those licenses and we are done. You can actually leave those licenses. You don't have to renew them anymore. So cloud-based tools are also picking up. So cloud gives you enormous amount of opportunities in terms of testing. One is you can actually scale your testing. You can do as much of load testing that you want. You can actually use enough virtual machines or instances in the cloud to actually run tests in parallel mode. You can actually look at reducing your overall length of testing by actually applying maybe virtual machines or using virtual machines to do your testing. You can improve on your coverage by actually using device-based labs or cross-browser testing labs. And then overall cost of testing also will reduce because you're trying to do things parallelly. At the same time, you're also looking at buying licenses on a monthly basis. You're reducing on your infrastructure costs. So these are some of the benefits that I would actually look at from cloud. And we also covered about what is different in digital. So now, Shoaib, we can go ahead and take questions from the team.
Thank you so much, Judge. So let me just pick up few questions that are coming in. There are some interesting questions that are coming in. So let me just pick up. So we'll start with the first query. So the question is, what are some of the use cases of AI and ML I should explore in case of application testing? You're on mute, George.
So maybe I'll cover the basic ones. So there are at least 5 to 10 use cases that I can think about. Maybe let's start off with something that is very basic or which is more aligned to digital apps. So the first one is basically around maybe keeping knowing your customer. So you have a lot of apps that are getting released into your App Store or your Android store or your iOS store. And it's very important to understand what your customers are talking about your apps. So that is a good use case. So getting customer feedback and analyzing the sentiments of the user is a good use case that where you can apply, because it's not just testing an app. You'd also look at the feedback that is coming from their end customers. So you can actually have custom applications that can actually look at the feedback or the comments that your users have posted about your product in an app store, and then use that information in order to actually improve your testing. That's a very simple use case. You can also use the data that is actually coming in from your ticketing tool. So your customers would have added data, or your customers would have actually logged tickets around your product in the cloud, in your production support system. Your customer support engineers will be actually logging those tickets or defects. So you can definitely look at those tickets and see like what kind of issues are actually getting reported. So there might be multiple issues. So it can be an issue with respect to the speed of your application. It can be an issue that's related to your functionality, or it can be even a security related issue, or it can be usability issue. So if you want to sit and manually do these kind of classification, it takes time. So you can again use an AI ML kind of an algorithm in order to classify these defects into various buckets. using an AI algorithm. You can actually get a lot of inferences. The other use case is basically around automation, where you can actually use algorithms around self-healing in order to improve the way in which you actually maintain your automation script. So there are multiple reasons due to which an automation script would actually fail. Your automation script would basically fail if you're actually dealing with a change in your UI object, or it can be related to a product defect, or it can be a workflow change altogether. Let's take an example of a control change that's happening in a what do you call mobile application screen. So when you're trying to run the script that is actually using this type of control, it actually fails because the object properties have changed. So you can actually have self-healing capabilities embedded within your automation framework or within your automation tool that can actually fix some of these issues automatically. So you don't actually have to go and fix them manually, because typically like average 5 to 10% of scripts would actually fail due to these kind of issues. And you can eliminate that entire effort by actually depending on self-healing algorithms. But you have advanced use cases also, like autonomous bots. You can actually find an instance of that within the pCloudy platform, where if you have a mobile app, you can actually do at least a good amount of smoke and sanity testing around the app using autonomous bots. So autonomous bots are what you call AI-based engines that has the capability to actually log into your system, provided you give them the credentials. It actually goes to every screen, do some basic testing, and it also has the ability to find out what the workflow is. And then it actually gives you a report telling like, I've run the script on 10 different devices. This is how each screen looked like. It gives you screen captures. It gives you failure notifications. It also tells you like, when I was doing testing on these 10 apps, this is how my battery and memory performance was. So you actually have a lot of options in today's world around automation itself. And finally, you also have, it's not just limited to software testing that test engineers are focused on, it is, or quality engineering teams are focused on. It also has what do you call use cases around developer-oriented testing. So there are tools that actually allows you to do test generation of unit test cases. So developers do not have enough time to run create unit test cases. There are engines or tools that actually helps you to improve your unit test coverage by helping you write unit tests. So there are multiple use cases. But one thing that you need to keep in mind is all of these use cases or products that are available with AI capability, the objective is not to replace humans, but they're going to complement your test engineers. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. So all of these two tools are basically enablers that will actually help a quality engineer to perform his or her task in a better way. So that is my response to here. We can go to the next question.
Thank you so much, George. So let me take the next question. So the next question is around which one is better, whether it's automation or manual app testing.
Okay, so I would say like it should be a combinational approach. So there's nothing like automation alone that would work. If someone has actually made a comment that 100% automation is possible, it may be possible, but do we really need 100% automation? So you definitely, it's not about writing automation scripts. So I think in the last couple of years, one of the trends that I've seen, one of the negative trends that I've seen is like, there are engineers who knows how to write good Selenium code or Java code, but they don't really know how to analyze the user requirements and then derive test scenarios or test cases from it. So that's a very dangerous trend. So the objective is to actually improve the quality of your product, whether you're actually doing manual or automated testing. And automation testing, if you're actually trying to automate a test case that's written by someone who's actually doing functional testing, it will actually find defects that only the manual test engineer is actually, or the functional test engineer has actually written. So it's not actually going to do something extraordinary to find defects. So the quality of your testing depends on the scenarios that you're trying to automate. So automation is not what you call recommended in every possible case. It is definitely useful when it comes to testing that is done more than once. For example, you have to execute the same test case maybe more than 2 times or 3 times. Then the use case can be very different. So basically, like it may be what do you say, testing that you need to do across multiple devices and browsers. So I can actually write a single test automation script, and I can actually run it on maybe 5 different devices or 100 different devices. So there's definitely a use case, because you don't have to repeat the work again and again. One test case that is written or one user story that has been written can be actually automated, and then you can run it on multiple devices as well as browsers. Or it can be a test case that you need to repeat for every what do you call cycle. So a good use case would be like, you may not actually do, for example, your product has actually gone live. You're not making much of changes to the application. You may not be actually, you should not be actually spending time on field level validations of every screen that you're having on your application. Rather, I would actually focus on, or we should actually focus on writing tests that actually test a workflow. or an end-to-end scenario, which can be actually repeated in every build. And these are very good candidates for your system integration test or for your regression test. So these are the tests that should be automated. So that again repeated, there are multiple times that you may actually use them. Or the other interesting area where which is not very much explored, because everyone would like to go on a fancy mode of automation, which is UI based. API testing is something that you can do maybe 100%. So you should be actually looking at automating your API testing. There are plenty of tools in the market that actually allows you to do that. So you should definitely look at automating your API test. Performance is a very good candidate. Performance and security, you may not be able to do any of these things manually. So those are 100% what you call automation kind of services or tests that you can look at. But from a functional testing standpoint, there is some element of manual testing that is required, and everything cannot be automated in the sense like it may not be feasible in terms of cost, in terms of time that is available. So we should have a mix of manual plus automated testing, and the focus should be on product quality, whatever mode you're using. Yes,
Thanks,
sure.
George. Yeah. Then there's a follow-up question. Is there a checklist that you recommend to test these apps thoroughly? What should be in that checklist?
Okay, so from a functional standpoint, you may not be able to go with a checklist-based kind of an approach because the functionality of every app is going to be very different. When you move from maybe I'm actually creating an app for maybe paying my credit card bills, your functionality will be very different from what someone else would actually develop. But from a non-functional testing standpoint, especially when it comes to a native app, there are certain types of testing that should be repeated every now and then. So that means like these are standard set of test cases that you can execute across multiple mobile apps that your organization is building. Or if you're working for a service provider, you can actually use it across customers. There are plenty of scenarios. If you actually sit and think through it, you may actually get maybe like 250 to 300 scenarios that you may need to execute on every app. So these may be related to simple things like interrupts. I'm using my mobile app and I'm actually getting a video call or an audio call or a text message. Is it actually causing some kind of problems for my app? Or am I getting notifications for my app? There might be different types of notifications and settings that are actually related to my app. So these are good two examples. And then maybe you can also look at network related aspects. So I'm using my app. Can I use my app with both Wi-Fi and maybe like a data connection? Is it performing the same way? Now I'm actually switching over. I'm using my app and I'm switching over from a 4G connection to a lower connection, maybe like 3G. Or I'm actually moving from 4G to maybe Wi-Fi. What happened? Is my data getting lost? Or I'm actually in an area where there's not enough reception. The network, what do you call, bandwidth is low, the network connectivity is low. Or I'm in an elevator for a few seconds. Is my app crashing during that time? So these are things. And then they also have device related stuff that you may need to test with. For example, it can be locking of screen, your low battery mode, your application, what do you call your, is my application logging out after a few seconds, things like that. So I would say like there are a lot of non-functional scenarios, which can be in the form of a checklist or a set of test cases that you can actually use. And this needs to be actually created at your organization so that you actually reduce the time that you take in order to reduce or the time that you take to create these test cases every now and then. One is basically you forget some of these scenarios if you don't have a standard way of testing. And then it should not be like every project I actually spend time in deriving these scenarios. So these are like reusable test cases that one should be focusing on.
Thank you, George. Let me take the next question. So some test automation projects fail, some succeed. Right. So what are the things to look for to create a successful test automation project?
I would say like majority of them fails. I would say like 60 to 70% of them would fail. And these are due to primary, very different reasons. So everyone needs to keep one thing in mind. Things that works for maybe for an Amazon or maybe an organization like maybe Walmart may not work for everyone. So the organization culture is different. The skill set availability is different. The technology might be different. So what works for company X may not work for company Y. That's something that even senior executives or leaders should actually keep in mind. The second thing is look at what all applications are there in your landscape and look at what really needs automation. For example, if I'm actually going ahead and modernizing my application next year, there's no point in actually doing automation now. You can actually do it after your application is modernized or when you're doing this modernization. That's very important. And then Once you actually pick your up, so there should be a framework using which you actually prioritize what needs to be automated from an application standpoint. And once you actually have that in place, you should know what areas of that application should be automated. So that entire planning exercise is not done in many organizations. So you don't know what you actually pick the wrong set of applications as well as the wrong set of functionalities for automation, or you may pick the wrong set of test cases. So that definitely needs a focus. So you definitely need to understand the focus areas of your automation in terms of functionalities as well as applications. And then you should also see how much of returns am I going to get. And returns always need not be in terms of money savings. It can be in multiple ways. Will I be able to reduce the amount of effort that I'm actually spending on my testing? Can I release my applications faster? Can I repurpose some of my engineers for maybe testing new enhancements? So returns can come in many ways, but you definitely need to know what is it I'm going to get when I complete my automation. That's very important. That's point number 3. Point number 4 is around selecting the right set of tools and framework for automation. So that actually is a very important aspect. So you definitely need to look at what kind of application do I have. So there's no point in actually purchasing a tool that only allows me to do mobile automation if I'm having package applications and custom applications that are like websites available in my organization. So look at maybe having what you call enterprise level decision, or a set of tools that you actually have to buy or develop in order to carry out automation. So picking the right tool depending on your technology as well as your future roadmap is very important for you to succeed. And many organizations I've seen, like, they invest on a tool because someone thought that the tool would actually do wonders for them, and or they'll actually have multiple tools and frameworks being used across the organization, which actually causes problems when you're trying to move people from one group to the other because they may not be familiar with the tool. That is one. And the other important aspect where people again go wrong is the approach that you actually select for automation. In the sense, like, there are multiple ways of doing automation. You can actually write Selenium, use maybe an open source technology like Selenium, write Java, C# or Python code in order to automate your test. For that, you need to have those kind of people in your organization. Maybe company X actually has that kind of skill set. It may work for them, but in my company, it may not work because I may not have the right skill set available. So you have to actually pick a call around what kind of automation is required in your organization, primarily by looking at what is available in your organization, or what are the type of skills that are available within my organization. Am I having engineers who are programming savvy, or do I actually have engineers who actually have exposure to maybe a scriptless kind of an automation tool? So you need to actually keep that in mind. And also, there's also a dependency on the type of application that you have. So all of these things are very important when you pick a tool. Look at the technologies, look at the skills that you have, and then decide upon the tool. Again, don't go with what a salesperson is telling you or what company X or Y has actually done. That's very important. And then finally, when you're executing an automation project, you also have to keep a close watch on what is happening. The quality of scripts is also very important. So many times a team is actually formed and the team basically develops a bunch of scripts. They tell you that it works, but sometimes when you actually try to run it for a formal regression cycle, it fails. That's where majority of the failure happens in automation, because the amount of money that you spend on automation, it never works. The assets are not actually tested thoroughly. The quality of assets are not good. And then finally, it actually breaks when you try to reuse it. So it's very important to keep a track of what that you're developing when the project is on. And you need to actually keep on running your automation scripts. You cannot actually develop 1,000 scripts and then keep it in a shelf and then tell that I've automated my application. No, you should be actually running it frequently, and you need to be making sure that it is actually in a usable condition. The more you run, the more it stabilizes. So that's also important. So if you follow some of these basic things around tools, prioritization of applications, bringing in more discipline when you're doing automation development, I'm sure that you'll definitely succeed in automation. Then finally, one point that I missed out is UI is not the only thing that you can automate. There are plenty of other tasks that you can automate. API testing is a good example. It may not look fancy because you may not be able to see something happening on your screen. That's fine. But look at automating different tasks, which can actually help you to reduce your time or improve coverage. That's all, Shoaib.
All right. So the next question is around what are your thoughts about the scriptless automation? Should companies adopt it, and how foolproof it is?
Okay, there are different thoughts. So there are maybe like 3 different approaches that you can take, as I was mentioning earlier. So if you actually have engineers who are good at programming, who are technology savvy, and if you're actually mostly doing custom application development using Java or .NET, maybe you don't have to go with a scriptless kind of an approach. You can actually go with the scripted kind of approach, where you can use a tool, a commercial tool that actually supports programming in VB Java or C# or Python. And you can also create a framework around the tool and then start using it. But for the prerequisite is basically you need to actually have skilled people in your team. Or you can actually go with a modernized approach. If you have an RPA tool within your landscape, you can very well go and use that RPA tool to actually carry out some of your automation tasks. Third approach is basically completely a pure play, what you call scriptless test automation, where you can actually go ahead and pick a tool. Maybe it can be an ops key or it can be a different tool, which actually allows you to do scripting or automation without knowing a programming language. So where I've seen that working, I would say like maybe there are 3 or 4 things that I've seen working in the past. One is if you're actually dealing with package applications in your organization, most of the testing of package application, whether it is SAP or whether it is basically a tool like Microsoft CRM or Salesforce or maybe Oracle e-business suite, it yeah, SMEs are actually doing testing, and they may be very good on the domain as well as on the functionalities and the capabilities of your package application. They may not be people with a lot of programming expertise or coding expertise, but they are actually people who knows how to test a workflow or a transaction within the package application. So I've seen scriptless adoption or scriptless automation tools working very well with these kind of package applications. That's one. Second area where I've seen this working is around low code, no code development, where again you actually get very limited time to develop your scripts because the low code application development or no code application development is almost 3 or 4 times faster than traditional development. So the applications are actually turned in very fast. You can actually use automation or scriptless tool to actually create these scripts. So scriptless testing is suited for package application as well as for low code kind of scenarios. If you do not have the right skills in your organization, if you have functional experts and less of technology experts, it might actually help. And if you speed up development, so traditional way of automation using scripts takes time because you have to write code, and it also takes time to maintain them in the sense like it may take time for you to actually update your scripts. So if you're actually looking at accelerating your test design or your automation design and maybe maintenance time, maybe Scriptless is actually a good option. And many of these Scriptless tools that are in market also has come up with self-healing kind of capability. So you can actually reduce on very much on your what do you call script maintenance time also. But so there are some what do you call challenges that you may run across when it comes to scriptless. Maybe, for example, you want to build something very custom. The controls are not supported or there are not methods. You may have to work with the vendor to actually bring in those capabilities. And I've also seen scriptless tools where you actually have extension kits. Extension kits in the sense like you can actually write maybe .NET code or a Java code in order to build in additional capabilities and methods. So that also gives you flexibility. So flexibility is one aspect that some of the scriptless automation tools do not provide, but nowadays they've also considered that as an option. So you also have an option to extend your tools capabilities by defining your own custom functions as well as what you call methods. So that also actually is an added feature. So there's no harm in using scriptless. It again depends on what works. Maybe what works for me may not work for you. So you have to actually see what is best. But there's definitely an option. There's also actually having a very good adoption in the market, mostly around low code, no code, as well as around package applications. That is my take on it.
Thanks, George. And there are questions around Dockers here. So let me just read out. So what are the benefits of using Dockers for test automation or in case of performance testing?
Okay, there are multiple use cases again. So Docker is not a new thing. It has been there for quite some time. And maybe the important use case that I would actually say is like, assume that you don't want to depend on a cross-browser testing solution, maybe like a pcloudy, and you want to actually run your what do you call test automation scripts across multiple browsers. So you can actually set up an infrastructure, maybe in the cloud or on your on-prem, where you can actually use Dockerized versions of browsers that can actually allow you to run tests in parallel. So I can maybe run maybe like I can actually spin up maybe like 50 different Docker instances and then run the test across those 50 instances. So there are frameworks or tools like Selenoid is a good example. They are basically Docker images that comes in with browsers where I can actually go ahead and run my test on those Docker instances. So I don't have to install browsers on my physical machine. I can run my test on these what do you call browsers, which are actually running inside a Docker instance or a container, and I can do my test in a very efficient way. So maybe like if you want to do parallel testing for cross-browser testing, or if you want to run the same test in Chrome, or maybe like I have maybe 5,000 tests that I have, and I want to run maybe 50 tests in parallel. Yes, I can actually have 50 different Docker instances on which I have Chrome browser. I can run it parallelly. Or The same test I want to run maybe across 10 different browsers. So I'll actually have 10 different, what do you call, Docker instances containing different versions of browsers. And I can do the execution of these 10 tests in a parallel mode. So that's definitely possible using Dockers. Or the other challenge that I've seen is, for example, I want to work on a tool. And the tool, for example, I want to do load generation with a tool or a set of tools. So I have to install the tool, I have to install the prerequisites. So there are a lot of tools that are available now, especially around performance and security. You actually get Dockerized version. So you can actually get maybe a Dockerized version of JMeter and then start using it. Or I can actually install maybe a DevOps tool like Jenkins within a Docker instance. And then I don't have to install anything. I have to just download the Docker image and then spin an instance using a command and then start using my Jenkins instance. So the installation speed, the pain that you have to undergo in installing apps, all of those things can be actually solved. So cross-browser testing or maybe compatibility testing or parallel testing is second use case. Compatibility can be the first use case. Having Dockerized versions of tools is maybe a third use case that I can actually look at. And then maybe you can also have your application. If your application supports containerization, you don't have to worry too much about installing your application in your environment. So what all copies you have created in your test environment, the same Docker image can be actually used to create a pre-production environment. So application deployments also get faster. And it's also easy to integrate all of these things into a DevOps pipeline. For example, I want to create a pipeline for running my security tests. I can actually have all my security tools in Dockers, and I can actually spin them up and then what do you call them inside my YAML script or my CI/CD script, and then use them for my what do you call DevOps. So there are multiple use cases. It's actually something that you definitely need to explore. It saves a lot of time and pains associated with the installation of application. It's relatively faster and also allows you to scale your testing to any extent possible. You can actually run parallel tests and then complete your test cycles at a very short duration. These are some of the simple use cases that I can think about, Shoaib.
Thanks, George. And a few more queries coming in. So, how does cloud testing help organization cut down their capital investment?
Okay, so I touched upon it at a very high level. So maybe a simple example is if I want to do maybe cross-device testing, or if I want to actually do a testing of a mobile app. Let's take an example of that. So I may actually have to maybe buy mobile devices. And as I was selling like 2,000, 3,000 devices coming into the market, and it may be very tough to actually identify but you'll have to actually look at the worst case scenario. You'll have to test with 10 devices. So I have to actually buy 10 devices. You will buy 10 devices now, and tomorrow, maybe after 6 months, you have another 5 devices coming into the market. So I buy those 5 devices. So you have to keep on buying devices to do your testing. That is one. Now, the current scenario, I don't think any organization has actually gone with what do you call it? Does they have a model where everyone is actually in the same location? So you actually have distributed teams. So there might be people working from home, there might be people working from remote locations. And if you're actually working in a mobile project, I cannot actually buy devices for everyone. And it's not easy for me to ship devices from one location to the other because you have very short time duration for your test cycle. So it may not be practically feasible to actually buy devices for everyone. So you can definitely reduce on the cost of your devices by actually going ahead with a what do you call device farm in the cloud, or in a public cloud, or on a private cloud, depending on the type of need that you have. The same applies to cross-browser testing also. It's very tough for me to actually buy hardware where I can actually support testing on multiple browsers. Or even if I want to actually run maybe 50 tests on my infrastructure, I need to have that kind of capacity. Even if I'm using Docker to run that 50 instances, Docker instances to do parallel testing or cross-browser testing. And the other pain point is I need to have someone dedicated to managing these devices and browsers, because they come up with updates. The vendors would actually come up with updates every now and then. So you have to actually invest even in a person also to manage your lab, which actually adds up to the cost. Rather, I'll actually move my entire testing of browsers as well as devices to the cloud, where I can actually look at what you call reducing my cost of infrastructure as well as the cost of maintenance. The same applies to performance testing. If I want to run a test with maybe like 1 million users in my on-prem kind of an infrastructure, it's actually going to cost me a lot. I would actually buy hardware devices that likely support my, maybe even if I'm going with a scaled down version of my production environment, it's actually going to cost me a lot in terms of infrastructure costs. So it actually is actually going to add up to my cost. Whereas if I'm going ahead with a cloud-based, what do you call this one? I don't have to buy any kind of infrastructure. So I'm not investing in anything. I would only pay the ongoing expense. Whenever I'm actually doing performance testing, I would actually pay for that environment. And after my needs, I'll actually shut it down. Finally, and another way of reducing your cost is maybe by looking at reducing your investments, initial investments on tools. So if I'm having 20, if I'm having a need of 15 maybe tool licenses, maybe a test management or automation licenses, I'll only buy those licenses now. Tomorrow, if I'm actually scaling up my project team, I'm adding another 5 people to my project. Maybe in the month of August, I'll buy licenses only for the month of August and September. And after that, I know that they're actually going to come out of the project. I'm only going to invest in tools for only 2 months. Again, you're actually buying it on a what do you call subscription based mode rather than actually buying maybe 15 or 20 licenses upfront and keeping it in my shelf. So I'll actually go with that kind of model. So all of these things together will actually help you to reduce your initial investment. So you can actually go with an on-demand model. Whenever you have a need, you go and invest in both infrastructure as well as tool licenses. So infrastructure is mostly around using the cloud, whereas tool licenses, you may actually go with a SaaS-based platform where you can actually buy licenses on a monthly mode and subscription. So that is what I would recommend.
All right, so let me just take then the next question. So I'm a functional test engineer, and how can I shift my career to the automation stream? That's it.
Okay. So I think there is a general perception that functional testing and test automation are the only streams that you can actually build a career in. Okay, that is in fact wrong. Or maybe there's another perception that if I am a test lead, the only option for me to actually is to get into test management. That is actually a false perception. So there are a lot of streams within testing. If you're actually doing functional testing, there are a lot of streams that you can actually get into. If you want to actually move away from a manual mode of testing, you can definitely pick maybe automation, and you don't have to be programming savvy in order to get into automation. As I actually mentioned earlier, the scripted kind of automation is just one mode of automation. You can actually go ahead and learn a tool like Kopsky or Tricentis Tosca, and then become a master in scriptless automation. Or you can actually go ahead and learn a tool like UiPath, where you can actually build expertise in RPA, as well as on RPA-based testing or using RPA tools for testing. So you don't have to be programming savvy in order to shift your career towards automation. But it's good, definitely, to learn a programming language. There's a lot of opportunities on the open source side as well. So maybe the top tools that if you want to actually go ahead and do scripted kind of testing, you can actually go ahead and learn tools like Selenium with Java or C# as the programming language. Or if you are starting something now, maybe you have to actually look at the modern age tools like Playwright, for example, or a Cypress, which is mostly focused around Angular-based automation. That's one stream of tools that you can learn. And you can also focus on API-based tools, maybe to start with. You can actually start with maybe something like a Karate framework, REST Assured, Postman, those kind of tools. So definitely there are options. If you're going with Scriptless, most of these vendors or tool providers actually has beautiful training academies that you can use. The same applies to RP also. That likely help you to gain expertise around these tools and the nitty-gritties around these tools. Okay. And there are a lot of material available in the public domain. YouTube is a very good source. I've seen free channels that actually allows you to do what do you call learn test automation and other things. And then you also have good amount of courses in platforms like LinkedIn Learning as well as Udemy. So there are plenty of free resources as well as paid resources using which you can actually learn test automation. The only thing that you need to have is confidence as well as a passion to learn. That's where I don't see both of these things in many people. So they feel they don't have the confidence that they can learn a tool, nor they are ready to put in effort, nor they have a passion to learn it. So then no one can help you. You'll always continue to do testing in the manual mode. And then if you are not a person if you feel that you're not the right person for automation, you don't have to feel bad. There are other streams within testing where you can build a career. Look at maybe data. Data is a very good field. Everyone is struggling to get proper test data for their projects. So you can look at learning, taking up test data management as your stream. Or if you're actually good in writing SQL statements, you've done data warehousing, database testing, look at building a career around data testing. You can actually be known for as a data testing professional. There's a huge demand for good data testers. Or maybe performance might be the field for you. If you're someone who has actually played around with maybe things like infrastructure, you're fond of performance, or maybe like the hardware part of it as well as application performance. Performance engineering might be the right skill for you. It is something that you can also master. Again, there are plenty of resources provided by vendors like BlazeMeter and others where you can actually learn all of those things. Cyber security, you can actually focus on application security or the entire network security as a stream. So there are plenty of opportunities around that. Test architecture is a good stream. you can actually be a test architect. If you're a lead, if you don't want to get in test management, you have to actually look at becoming a test architect or an automation architect or a performance architect. So a lot of streams and possibilities, but you definitely need to explore. Automation is not just a stream, and within automation, learning programming knowledge is not a prerequisite to become an automation engineer anymore. You can either learn on a Scriptless tool or what you call an RPA tool, and then still do test automation, or you can actually focus on API based automation where you don't have to do a lot of programming. But if you're someone who's very fond of programming, definitely you can go with the open source route, learn Java, or use your Java or Python or C# skills to build tests. So there are multiple options, and there are plenty of resources available in the public domain. Udemy is there. There are plenty of mentors that you can actually go after in using a platform like LinkedIn. Will be ready to help you for free. So there are options. Only thing that you need to have is a passion, confidence that you can learn things, and you may have to spend some amount of time to actually learn. So dedicated time is also required to learn these or acquire these skills. But it's important to stay relevant in this stream, because the testing as a stream is actually going more. It's mostly becoming technology oriented. For example, you need to learn technology in order to even at least if you want a good example is if I'm testing an app in the cloud in the Azure environment, or if I'm actually testing, doing performance testing of an app that is actually hosted in cloud, I should be knowing the basics of cloud. For example, if I'm a performance tester, I should know the basics of Azure. If I'm running my performance test in Azure, I should be knowing how to actually monitor the performance of my Azure app using Azure monitoring service and things like that. So it should become more technology focused as well. It is not just focusing on testing. You should also learn some of these technologies that have actually come into the market. That's a long answer, Shoaib.
Thank you so much for patiently answering that query, George. I'll just take a few more questions. We are nearing to the end of the session, but like just put some more queries here. So there's one quick question. So how do I select the right set of browsers for testing my website?
Very interesting question. As there are multiple browsers and multiple, what do you say, devices available in the market, it's very tough to take a call. But I've seen reports. For example, I've seen a report from pCloud itself that actually gives me a fair view on what kind of mobile devices are being used. And you can also get similar reports around browsers where I can go and find out. For example, if I'm releasing my product or website to the public domain for the first time, it will be very easy for me to actually go and look at some of these reports and then decide, okay, this is the type of users. For example, I'm dealing with this app in maybe in a country like maybe Singapore. I should be able to go and find this data around what kind of mobile devices are being used by people, what kind of websites are being used by browsers are going to be used by people, and then do my testing around those websites or around those browsers and devices. Because I will not have any data available because your app is new or your website is new. So you have to look at what is available in the public domain. It can be reports that are published in the public domain, or it can be a platform provider specific report like the one that I was talking about, pCloudy. They can actually give you that initial insight. Now, once your application is actually being pushed into production, look at if it's a website, look at something like Google Analytics. It gives you a wealth of information around things like the operating system from where your customers are actually logging in, what pages are being used by your users, what kind of resolutions are they using, what kind of browser versions they are using. All of those things are actually known to you, but rarely I've seen testers going and exploring these things. Our objective is like my project manager told me that I have to test in 5 browsers. I'll decide what are those 5 browsers. No. If your app is already there in production, look at some of these data that is actually coming in. That basically, again, an area of production feedback, where you can actually gather this data from your application logs or maybe Google Analytics. Use the data to decide upon what are the 5 browsers or devices on which I should be doing my testing, because you definitely see a trend. Maybe like 60 or 70% of your users are actually using either Firefox or Chrome, and they're only very like 2 to 3% using Edge. So will I prioritize on Edge or will I use Chrome and Firefox? Definitely I'll go with Chrome and Firefox, and then maybe do some basic test on Edge to make sure that it actually is working. So you have to actually adopt a risk-based testing approach when it comes to cross-browser and cross-devices, because there are plenty of browser versions, providers and devices that are available in the market, and you cannot do testing on all of those. You definitely go with a risk-based approach where you only look at the important ones rather than actually doing and spending time on testing everything. So that is not the right approach. You'll have to definitely adopt a risk-based approach, but the risk-based approach should be definitely backed up by enough metrics or data that is available in public domain, as well as from your own servers, if it is like a website that is currently available.
Thank you, George. And we'll just try to take one more question here. So, what are some of the metrics that will help us to demonstrate the value of test automation?
Okay, so that's a very important thing. Especially, I think this is more applicable to senior leaders in our organization, because it's very important to show that automation is working in your organization. So it should not be like it again depends on your goal. So the goal of automation is not just to reduce cost. Sometimes it can be, but it's not always. So it can be in terms of bringing in more coverage, or it can be in improving the throughput of your releases. For example, I'm doing 3 releases now. I want to actually, what do you call, make it 5 releases. So how can I do that? I can actually reduce the time that I'm taking for my testing by bringing in more automation. For example, if one test cycle is actually taking 15 days for me, can I make it 3 or 4 days? So these depends on your objectives, and some of the simple metrics that you can actually use, which will actually help both stakeholders from business and IT side is maybe like look at your release frequency. How frequently am I releasing now? Am I actually having maybe like releases every quarter, or am I putting maybe number of releases? Can be a good example. Previously, maybe before automation, I was actually doing 3 releases. Now I'm actually doing maybe 6 releases because I'm actually cutting down on my test cycle. Or go one level below that. Look at the amount of time that is taking for your test cycle. If I was taking 3 days for doing my test cycle earlier, now I'm able to do it in maybe half an hour or 1 hour. So test cycle duration before and after can be a good metrics. The amount of effort or cost that you're spending on test automation before and after, or on regression testing is a good example. For example, I was actually taking maybe like 1,000 hours to complete my regression testing earlier. Now I'm able to actually complete regression testing maybe in 100 hours of effort. So these are some of the simple metrics, or it can be in terms of quality. Your Once you started doing automation, once you started running your automation scripts across multiple browsers and devices, your quality has improved. You want to demonstrate the quality improvement. Look at how many defects were actually getting reported earlier because of compatibility issues. And now once you implement automation, how many of them are actually getting reported now? So these are simple metrics, but very rarely leaders or managers do these kind of reporting, but it's very important to actually demonstrate the value of automation to stakeholders, because they're investing money in automation. So it's important to show that it is working in your organization. Sometimes automation may not be working for you, and unless you actually have data to prove that it is working or not working, it's not going to help anyone. Either you have to stop investing money and then focus on the right areas of automation, or if it's working, you may actually try to do more automation. So it's good to you need to have some kind of metrics getting reported on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis to take a call and to also demonstrate the value. It is very important. Yes,
Hmm.
Shoaib.
Well, thank you so much, Judge, for your sharing your valuable insights with some practical examples and also the real world scenarios. I really appreciate your time, and certainly your answers will have definitely covered a lot of practical pointers, and provided our audience an insightful experience and also the knowledge, right? So they which they can use and apply. So it's a
Yeah.
truly an honor to be hearing from you. Thank you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
And
thank you,
we
thank you. Yeah,
also
thank you, P-Cloudy team, for the opportunity. It was a great set of questions, and I look forward to more of such events in the future.
thanks, George. And we also want to thank each one of our participants for joining us at our second webinar on the Break Free series stage. So we are sure George's insight on the adoption of cloud solutions and also the automation has sparked few ideas that you can take back and implement for yourself. So thank you once again for being a wonderful audience. Good day. Also, please feel free to write us at info@peakstudy.com with your questions. So we will try to reach you out personally as soon as possible. And just a bit of note, Cloudy is organizing an hackathon for all the automation users. So the automation is planned on 30th of July. You can still register on the platform. Please log into peakcloudy.com and just run through the hackathon, the plan that is set out. So there are a lot of goodies and exciting prizes to be won. So look forward to see you there as well. So thank you again. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, George.
Thank you, team. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Have a great day. Bye bye.